Well, good morning and welcome. My name is Brian Bain, and I teach in the missions department here at Dallas Seminary. And I'm excited to, again, welcome you to Missions and Evangelism Lectureship this week, which is going to be taking place today and tomorrow in chapel, and a number of other activities going on around the Missions and Evangelism Lectureship. We've got a lot of mission agencies outside that you can visit with. You're going to learn more about ways to serve, and we'll have opportunities at lunch after this, which we'll mention at the end of the talk as well. And I want to say thank you to the leadership of Dallas Seminary for having a Missions and Evangelism Lectureship every fall here at DTS. So how about let's clap? Thank you. Today's chapel speaker is Mr. Ross Ramsey. Ross is currently the Director of Church Relations for E3 Partners. Prior to that, he served for 10 years at FBC Allen as the Minister of Discipleship. And Ross has served in a variety of contexts, including Lifeway and Bellevue Baptist Church. He studied at Dallas Seminary and ultimately graduated from Southeastern Seminary. He has 3 children and 1 wife, Jill, who is here with us today, along with several other children. His whole family is involved with equipping the local church to make laborers that will go into the harvest. Will you join me in welcoming Ross?
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. All right, thank you guys. Someone texted me a mistake here. I'm going to make it already. Field 3 is actually Field 4, so sorry about that, guys. Thank you, Nikki and Bethany, for the beautiful music. I am the last guy that ever envisioned him standing up here at DTS at the chapel. I am much more comfortable sitting where you are right now, so bear with me. Is that fair? My plan today is to tell you all a story that God chose to involve me. There's a lot of other people that could tell this story better. I'm just the one up here telling it. And so my hope is today that this story will stir your affections and your obedience for Jesus Christ over the next few hours, or next hour, sorry. It's 2 days. I don't do this a lot. Cut me some slack, come on. All right, so this story, you're not gonna read about it in any journals. You're not gonna hear about it in any podcast because it's not sexy. And it's extremely decentralized, and I think that was by God's design. And so this is a story that happened just about 30 minutes north of here. And to be honest, like I said, I kind of Forrest Gumped my way into this story. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the story, how it started about 8 years ago. And then at certain points, I'm going to drop in and make some points. And then tomorrow, I'm going to tell you about what's happened in the last 8 years. So for me, this story started in 2016. I was on staff at First Baptist Church Allen. I was the minister of education. They don't use that term anymore. It's an ancient term. It's the discipleship pastor. And if I remember correctly, it was the fall, early summer of 2016. And our pastor at the time was Chad Self. And our church had seen remarkable growth in the early 2000s. It had just spiked because the community was growing, and then we started to level off in the teens, in the 2000 teens, and he was getting, I can remember our meetings, he was very frustrated. He wanted to reach our community. What pastor in the Western Hemisphere does not? So we went to conferences. We went to Andy Stanley's church. We went out to we went out to Saddleback. We started brainstorming all these ideas, and we were, this is what you do on staff, right? You get the whiteboard and you start thinking about how can we reach our community and all the ideas and the million ideas. Well, unbeknownst to me at that time, we had a Spanish pastor on staff. His name is Ted Linwall. He was a missionary from Central America. And he, unbeknownst to us, he had a church on our campus that he was using. He decided to go and walk around the corner to an apartment complex, and he felt like there was a lot of Hispanic people in this apartment complex, so he goes and meets with the apartment manager. And she's like, nope, there's no Hispanics here, but your church or some church needs to be over here doing something in this apartment complex for all the kids that are running around in the evening. And so he goes back to my pastor, Chad, and tells him, hey, this apartment complex manager is begging for us to come over there and do something. So I'll never forget this meeting. We're in a staff meeting, and we're wrapping up, and my pastor, Chad, is looking at me. He goes, oh, by the way, I need one of you guys to run something down for me. There's an apartment complex around the corner. The manager wants us to come over there and do something. And I remember all the other staff just kind of looked down, and I was the only one that had my head up. And I said, I'll run it down, Chad. I'll look into it for you. I'll see what's about. So Ted sets up a meeting. I go over to this apartment complex and I meet with the manager. Her name was Susan. I go in there and I'm gonna be really transparent with you. She's F-bombing about every other word. I'm like, do you know what I do for a living? She's just crude. And she's like, you guys need to be over here. You need to, and she's just, she's going on. And she literally hands me the key to the rec room. She goes, you guys need to be over here doing something. I said, oh, okay. So on the way out to the car, and she's a chain smoker, by the way. She lights up a cigarette and she goes, I look, as we're walking out of her office, I look above the tree line and I see our steeple. And I was like, oh my gosh, I never realized you can see our steeple from here. And she's like, yep, let me tell you the story about that. Remember that storm 2 weeks ago? I go, yeah, I remember that storm. She goes, there was a whole grove of trees right here. And I came out to get my smoke break. The trees all fell down during the storm. I looked up and I saw that steeple. And I said, that church needs to be over here doing something. And the next day, that guy from your church walks into our office. I was like, at the time, I thought it was coincidental. Didn't think much of it at the time. Oh, point one. Guys, I didn't know this, but at the time, God was giving my field one, my entry strategy into our community. It's the where and the who. I did not know it at the time. It was kind of like the Macedonian man in Acts chapter 16 where he's like, Paul has that dream. And he's like, come over here. Well, this is what was happening in our community. It was a place that was begging us, come, please. So I go back to our staff. I go, guys, they want us over here. I don't know what to do. So what do? We do what every other church does. We do a bunch of neat stuff. We did some after school stuff. We did some stuff in the rec room. I think we did 3 things for the parent. We had like a parenting class. We set up a big inflatable stuff out on a Saturday. Did all this cool stuff. 0 impact on an apartment community. Now, it made us feel really good about ourselves. I think we got into the Collin County Baptist Association publication. It did. Absolutely. It made our people feel really good. Anyway, long story short, about that time, I just kind of given up on the apartment complex. I'm on Facebook, and I checked out a friend of mine named Jeff Crick, who's a doctor at Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, and he's doing a training at his church. And he invited this guy named Troy Cooper up from Southern Florida. And I saw this training, and they're role playing, and and then the next picture is they're in an apartment complex sharing the gospel. And then a few days later, I noticed a picture of them baptizing somebody in the pool at that apartment complex. And I'm like, what is this about? Now, I'm extremely skeptical. I'm a contrarian. I was like, but something about me, God's like, look into this. So I look into this. And he begins to tell me about it. And I'm like, this is interesting, but there's no silver bullet in ministry. And so he puts me in touch with Troy, who then, through a long story, he puts me in touch with a guy named Don Waybright. I'm mentioning all these people's names because it's important to me. He was the missions pastor at Sugar Creek Baptist Church outside Houston. And Don, I call him, and he's like, yeah, we're doing this training down here, and it's changing people. I'm like, well, He sends me an email right after that, and he basically outlines what they're doing. In that email, there were 4 names. Kumar, who is a missionary in India. I've met him since. Jeff Sundell. I don't know if you know, he's been here. Nathan Shank, who's been here. And another guy named Kyle Pearson. And he had the phone number for Jeff Sundell and Kyle Pearson on there. Well, I put the email aside for about a day. About a day in, I come back from lunch and I'm looking at the email and I go, I know this guy, Jeff Sundell. Where do I know this name? I'm like, oh my goodness. I pull out my prayer journal. 16 years prior at Southeastern Seminary, I go to a church. Remember how the missionaries would put all their cards on the thing and you would take the card? Remember them? Well, his card was on there. He was there the semester before me. I took his card. I took about 10 of them. And I've been praying for this guy for 16 years. I had no idea who he was and what he was doing. He comes into my life again. So I call him. I leave a message. I didn't hear anything. So I call the next guy on the list, which is Kyle Pearson. I didn't know at the time, he worked for a ministry called East West. Didn't know East West from north or south. Didn't care. I call him, he answers the phone immediately. And I said, hey, I hear you're like the area rep for this training. I have no idea, who are you? And he goes, what are you doing tomorrow? I'll meet with you. It was Kyle Pearson, a guy named Aaron Probanik. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll meet you tomorrow morning. And that was a Tuesday, it was a Tuesday when we met. And I met at the Panera Bread right outside Nebraska Furniture. And he told me, hey, we're going to be sitting in the front. So I go in there, and there they are, and these are just two guys. I'll never forget it, waiting for me. They're in their mid-30s. And within a few moments, I realized, hey, who are you? What's your story? Neither of them have ever been to seminary, never served on a church staff, and never served vocationally anywhere in ministry, and I'm listening to these two guys. And I couldn't get out of there fast enough. And I'm just listening. One of them was a former pro pitcher for the Pirates. The other was a commercial real estate guy. About 10 minutes into our talk, or our conversation, and again, I was trying to get out of it, their phones go off. And it was 10:02. And they go, hey, do you mind if we pray real quick? And I was like, well, I'm in the middle of a conversation. Sure, I'm not against prayer. I mean, why not? Yeah. It felt weird. And they prayed Luke chapter 10, verse 2, which it says, pray to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into the harvest, because the laborers are few, but the harvest is plentiful. I actually like the King Jimmy a little bit better, beseech. Right. I came out of that prayer, and it was like God said, listen to these guys, I'm with them. And I listened to them. And I actually started praying that prayer every day. I thought it was cute. See, when I thought of laborers, I thought of people helping me in the church do the work of the church, right? I don't think that's what that verse means. At the end of that conversation, I quickly was trying to get out. I mentioned offhandedly, there's an apartment complex that's begging us to come over there and do something. He's like, what? You got a place in your community begging you to come in? I'm like, yeah. He goes, we're going to be at your church next Tuesday at 1 p.m. and we're going to show you how these tools and principles work. And I'm like, okay. Just to get out of the meeting, I said yes. Point 2. Acts 4:13, the Sadducees took notice of their boldness and concluded that these were untrained, uneducated men that had been with Jesus. This is who these guys were. What I didn't know at the time is that these men had been praying and fasting. They had just come off a week-long fast. Have any of you fasted for a week? It crushes you physically. They had been running all over DFW, knocking on doors, trying to find a legacy traditional church to do what some of these movement principles. Didn't know any of that, wouldn't have cared. And they finally gave up because they were getting nowhere. And I could have told them why they were getting nowhere. I mean, I just told you the profile of these guys. No one's going to give them a chance. In this setting, in DFW. So they said, you know what, God, we're going to stop doing it our way. They prayed and fast. At the end of that week-long fast, I called them. So God's beginning. Oh, by the way, yes, I didn't realize this. It was an outside catalyst was coming into my life. An outsider was getting ready to catalyze me. This was a key piece in this point. An outsider was coming in to my life. And so, like I said, the other thing that struck me about these guys in hindsight, here's something to hold your, never charged me a dime. Never asked for money. Blew me away. Everybody in DFW that's offering a service, there is a string attached. These guys never asked for anything. What's freely received is freely given. Jesus said that. That hit me. Well, a week later comes along. They show up on Tuesday afternoon, and I forgot all about it. I was like, oh no. I knew what they were going to do. I kind of in my mind. And to be honest with you, I had started a text. You ever started a text and you forget to send it to somebody? I had started a text to cancel that morning, but I forgot to send it. I got preoccupied. They show up. And they sitting down there in the lobby, and the lady's like, hey, Ross. I'm like, oh, no, geez. I'm going to take my medicine and go down there. And they're like, you ready? I said, sure. You get your coat? I'm like, yep. I knew what they were going to do. I'm like, I'm not doing this. But anyway, so Kyle's like, you coming with me? We're going to go over that apartment complex. By the way, this apartment complex was all of it's like a par 4 from our church. I could see it. And so Kyle goes, come with me. And Aaron, we went to building 15. I'll never forget it. Aaron starts walking around the outside. And Kyle's going, come watch me. And he's going to start knocking on doors. That's for kooks. And that's for Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons. And I remember the first door, I thought to myself, no one is going to open the door to 2 men in the middle of the day. I wouldn't open the door to you. Sure enough, he goes, come on. And I'm standing 20 feet back. First door. And I'll never forget it. I'm like, I am so mortified and embarrassed and uncomfortable at what he was doing. And I'll never forget the first door. I'm going to run quickly here. He knocks on the door, and this girl comes to the door. Her name was Leslie. She had blonde hair, and she had rainbow streaks coming down. She had a hoop earring, noses, everything. And he's like, hey, we're from the church around the corner, and we've been praying over this area, and we thought it'd be a good idea if we actually engage the people that live here, each of you, one by one. And we got to your door today. And I'm there with my buddy Ross, and I'm over there just like, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And is there anything we can pray for you, Leslie? And she goes, well, I'm not religious. She goes, that's all right. She goes, okay. Yeah, I'm pregnant. And my boyfriend wants me to get an abortion. I just don't think it's right. And I'm like, what? And I'm hearing this, and I'm like, okay, Kyle, let me come and save you. I'm the professional pastor here. And he was brilliant. He said, well, Leslie, do you mind if we pray for you right here? She goes, right here? Yeah, sure. He prays a real quick prayer, and he comes out of the prayer, and he goes, Leslie, I'd like to ask you, if you don't mind, one other question. What gives you hope in life? And she said, my grandmother. She was religious. And he goes, well, I could see how they give you. He goes, I'd love to share with you a story that's changed my life. And he just had note cards, no Bible and a pen. He goes, let me share you this story. It's changed my life. You got a minute? And he shared the gospel with her like that. I was in awe. By the fourth door, I was doing all of it except the gospel piece. I was like, I could do that. And by the fourth door, I was like, I got this. The last door, I'll be really quick. I'm running out of time here. I got so much to cover. The last door, I'm doing everything except the gospel piece. The last door, we've been out there an hour and 15 minutes. I knock on the door, and this lady comes to the door, and I said, hey, we're out. I'm from the church. She goes, anyone need prayer? And she looks back, and she goes, John, you need prayer? And she goes, he needs prayer. And he's like, and he's sitting on the couch with a remote and a wife beater watching some show or something. I don't know. And she's like, come on in. I was like, we go in. I was like, all right. So we sit down on the couch, and she goes, John, tell him what's going on. And he goes, you got a second? And he gets up and walks to the back of the apartment and comes back with his Bible. It had a leather cover and zipper and papers. And he goes, hey, my mom died 3 weeks ago. She gave me this Bible and told me to start reading it. Can you help me? I'm like, what the heck? And so I'd love to tell you what happened with him. I don't have time. Point 3. I saw in an hour and 15 minutes what it means to disciple somebody and equip somebody. What Kyle was doing with me is a phrase we use. It's called MAW, Model, Assist, Watch, Launch. Some of you maybe have heard of it. That's how you make disciples. You can't do it from a stage like this. And he had done model, assist, watch, all within an hour and 15 minutes. I got it. And I said, this is different. It builds competency and confidence in the skill you do when you will follow that. And I quickly realized that in Luke chapter 10, verse 2, that I had been praying all week, God told me, Ross, you ain't a laborer. And I'm not going to send you any laborers until you become a laborer. till you become a practitioner. And it became very clear to me. I mean, I shared the gospel. Someone came into my office and I handled visitors. I did all that stuff. That was just like mowing the lawn and putting deodorant on. You had to do that. But actually going and finding lostness in my community, I had no gear for that. So, real quickly, I'm going to read this. Mark chapter 4, verse 26 through 29. This is one of Jesus' parables. He said, this is the kingdom. This is what the kingdom of God is like. It's a man scattering seed on the ground night and day. Whether he sleeps or gets up, the seed sprouts and grows, though he does not know how. All by itself, the soil produces the grain. First the stalk, then the head, then the full kernel. And as soon as the grain is ripe, he puts the sickle because the harvest is ready. I lived that parable that day. This is what happened. That guy made me into, God did, through him, a laborer. I was the laborer now. I went into the field, an empty field that there was no spiritual stuff going on in this apartment complex. It was a place of darkness and brokenness, literally across the street from our church. And we're sitting here in our little bubble at our church, never walked across the street. And I leaped over into field 2, which is the gospel. We shared the gospel immediately with people. The seed was being sown. Laborer, farmer, whatever you want to call him, going into an empty field, sowing it. I was living this parable. Didn't know it. I went back for a month with Kyle. We kept going back every week, and incredible stories. Do not have time to I want to bore you. Just it's right across the street from my office. Point 4, I'm going to steal from old Henry Blackaby. God is always at work in our community. He's working right now. He's working across the street. He's working in this community. And Henry Blackaby is right. The issue is, are you willing to make the adjustments to join what he's doing at work around you? And Henry says it great. It's a crisis of belief, and it's a crisis of belief, and faith. And so what I realized is, for me to join God's activity in my community, I had to die to my paradigm, to my comfort, to my calendar. And what I realized in my church, there was a whole slew of people waiting for my death. And the community was too. Jesus said it, Mark chapter 8, verse 35, whoever loses his life for me and the gospel. In John 12, 24, truly I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and remains alone, but if it dies, it produces fruit. My death was key. Really quickly here, I found out there was a training for this stuff at Sugar Creek. I went down to Sugar Creek. I took my family. I had a 9-year-old son, 11-year-old son, and a 13-year-old daughter, which are here right now. We went to this training, basically to train on what I was doing at a church. I want to see it in a church context. Went down to Sugar Creek in the meantime. And what struck me about the training is how simple it was, is my kids took to it faster than I did. I was like, this is cool. And the other thing that struck me is the guy, Don Waybright, the staff member at Sugar Creek, he was in the back of the training for most of the training. You know who was leading the training? Was these 2 people that got saved through this ministry a year earlier, and now are in front of people, training people on how to do this. I did not have a category for that. Here's why this is so critical. I involved my family by default. It's one of the best decisions ever made. See, in the typical church, it's the pastor and the staff. They're off, and the husband's off, and he's off. He's up teaching. He's on a platform like this, or he's up in front of a group, and the family is usually in the background, passive, kind of going through the motions and just staying in the back. What this did is it flipped the script. Now, my wife and my daughter are better trainers at this than I am, and my boys do this. And so what it created sustainable ministry for me, because I wasn't off stealing time from the family. They became part of the training, became a part of this. Does this make sense? The old model of the man being taken away and stealing time from the family was no longer there. And this is absolutely critical long-term for the sustainability of this ministry. I've got to skip notes. I'm going to run real quick here. There's so many things I'm cutting out. I wish I could tell you guys more of the God stories. Let me really quick. Not long after that, I said, I need to train the rest of my church in this. And I had really paused to doing that because I was embarrassed of what I was doing. No one's going to buy this. So crazy set of circumstances I can't get into. God was telling me, I want you to take this to your pastor. I want you to take this to church. And I'm like, nope, I'm fine just leaving it with me. And, but God forced my hand. I don't have time to get into that. And I called a leadership meeting on a Sunday night at 5 p.m. I called all the leaders I could. I put in all of my chips. I called every leader. I mean, I've been on staff for about 6 years. Oh, by the way, in that hour and 15 minutes in that apartment complex, I did more mission than I had done in 6 years prior to that. In an hour and 15 minutes with this guy. So I called these leaders together, and it was a Sunday night, and I kind of tell them some cool stories at this point. And I show them some of the tools, and there's 75 people in this room. My pastor was off to the left, and Tim Willigers was off. I can still see him. My pastor was there, and 75 people in the room, and I tell them the stories, and I go, hey guys, what do you think? Complete silence. Just kind of like you guys are right now. This is a white, upper middle class church in Allen, Texas. We don't do stuff like this. It's very uncomfortable. I can remember I started to sweat, and I had some splotching going on right here. And I could see my pastor off to my left going, what is he doing? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I just lost my job. And right about that time, sitting right there, I'll never forget it, Louise Phillips raised her hand. Louise Phillips was 85. She was the matriarch of the church. She had been there since the early 60s. It's kind of like that. When she spoke, everyone listened. She had the largest group in our church. She rarely ever spoke at a meeting. She was kind of like a Yoda-esque kind of. She just sat back, and that's real nice, Ross, and would leave meetings. And I had been in several meetings with her. She never said anything. Very influential. My pastor always had, if she said jump, he said how high. She raises her hand. She never talks at any of our meetings. She goes, Ross, may I say something? I said, by all means, somebody say something. She goes, Ross, about 30 years ago, I had a dream. No, we don't talk like that in our church. Of God bringing something to our church that will help us get out into our community and share the gospel. And she goes, Ross, God told me this was it while you were talking. That's all I needed. I was like, and then right after that, a guy named Jeff Wood was right behind her. He's like, yep, I totally agree with it. This is God's thing. I'm like, I was dying up there. So I put the training date on the board. It's 9 to 4 on a Saturday in 2 weeks. I was told no one would come to a training for all day Saturday in Allen. We got a lot of, I don't know if you know anything about that area, it's sports crazed. The idea of someone giving up a whole Saturday was beyond them. We have that thing up there called the Baal Temple. It's the Allen Stadium. Have you heard of it? Football. Point 6. I'm going to do this. I'm going to put a big heart around this. This is going to be important. I'm going to put, this is an attempt at a heart. Guys, I don't know if you caught here. I'm put prayer, fasting, and abiding surrounds this work. Guys, I was the beneficiary of people's prayers, and I had no idea. This lady started praying 30 years prior, 25 years before I ever set foot in that community. Someone was already praying for this to begin to happen. And those two guys were praying and fasting to find a church. I didn't know them. Do you realize I am just a pawn in this thing? 25 years before that, I was a punk college student, and this lady starts praying for what I'm going to be involved in. Is that not the kingdom of God? I was just a beneficiary of a bunch of other people's prayers. And I thought I was the sharp, I got it. No, I was the product. Training day comes. And we train in the morning. It's training. In some of it, you've been to it here. It's changed a lot over the years, but we've morphed it. So we're like, all right, you guys ready? You guys learn what to do? We're going out. It's called rapid obedience. It's when you learn something, you immediately apply it. If there's any gap between that, it's usually where disobedience sets in. And so we had 45 people, 15 groups of 3. We sent them out, and you could feel the tension in the room. They're like, oh, I thought we were coming to get trained and eat Chick-fil-A and go home. What are you talking about? What? They're like, I didn't tell anybody. There's a bait and switch. So any long story short, they went out, and you could feel the tension. And a lot of them didn't know each other. We're a church of about 1,100, so I'm putting people, Jill helped me put the people like, hey, you 3 go here, go to building 13, you go, so they go back to this apartment complex that we have been attempting to have gospel saturation. And so I go out with 2 people. I go with 2 ladies, Gayleen and Anna. Ann had a dry heave on the way over there. She was so sick. She was so nervous. Went out, come back a little bit early, and I come back to the room, and no one's in the room. I came back about an hour and 15 minutes after we were out there, about an hour. We told them to be out for an hour and 15 minutes. I gave them assignments. I told them, do exactly what you got trained in this morning. Go do it. They come back, and I'm sitting there, and there's nobody in the room. It's just me. And I'm thinking, they all went home. Oh, my goodness. Lost my job twice. And sure enough, they start coming back in, and they are different people. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but they're like hitting each other on the butt, make fun of each other's moms. I'm like, what the heck happened here? I mean, you guys just went out mad, and now they're coming back, and they're like happy. And within about 5 minutes, I had 5 people deep wanting to tell me what happened in the harvest. I'm like, whoa, someone else needs to hear this. Guys, every single group had a significant interaction with someone. We had a Muslim lady, you put a category on this, that came to the Lord that day. She was a Kurdish, Iraqi Kurd. We had a group of Iraqi Kurds in our community. She had been praying to Allah that morning, and the real God answered. She ended up getting saved, coming into our ESL program. My wife hung with her for a long time. We had a young Islamic girl who had a dream the night before that a white woman with long hair would come to her door. Yeah, that kind of stuff. It's supposed to happen somewhere else, right? It was happening where we were. So, several things fired off that day. We found our community was waiting for us. We didn't buy into the lie that we had to wait for them to attractionally come into our church. We went and found them. I also found that, I'll say this and then I'll say something else. They formed community within an hour and 20 minutes out together, and they came back and they were buddies. I'm like, what happened? What we found is if you get people on mission, you'll always get community. If you shoot for community, you rarely get mission. We saw that over and over again. I'm reminded of that phrase in the Old Testament where God says over and over again, when you see this, you will know I am Lord. And that's exactly what happened. So I'll end with this. Let me say this. The next day was Sunday. That was Saturday afternoon. We ended up with 15 follow-ups, approximately 15 to 17 follow-ups, where people were like, yeah, come back. I'd love to learn more. And what was really cool was several of the people that had follow-ups would come up and go, like, what do I do now, Ross? What do I do with these people? I'm like, you've been a Christian your whole life and you have no idea what to do with these people? They're like, no, what do I do? What do I do? And what I realized at that moment is they were open to the field 3, which is discipleship, what I'll get into tomorrow. They were very open to field 3 tools and principles because they had a live example across from them. It's kind of like if I send you a video on how to fix a broken toilet and you don't have a broken toilet, you're not really going to pay attention to that video. But if you have a broken toilet, you're going to pay attention to that video. You're going to be watching that video, right? And you'll be like, and that's exactly what I realized is you had to create the demand for the discipleship tools because they had real people in front of them. Does this make sense? By nature, it was called just-in-time training. So many things fired off. The next day was Sunday. I'll be here. I'll finish. My pastor looks at me. We're at our prayer time. He goes, Ross, And my pastor at that time, Chad, was a very jaded man. He was not known for this kind of hyperbolic statement, but he said that was one of the best days of ministries I've ever seen in 35 years of ministry. When they came back, so it was like an Acts, like type 2 all fell in the room because they were telling stories. And what I realized is they had experienced Christ in the harvest, and it flipped them. They died to their comfort, their calendar, and they experienced Christ on the other side. So he says, Ross, you got to get up and tell the church what happened yesterday. I go, me? I go, that's your job. He goes, no, end of the service, you need to get up. So I got to end the service, and I reported that we prayed for 72 people. We shared the gospel 51 times, and we had somewhere between 15, 17 follow-ups. I'll never forget what happened. Those 45 people that were at the training that day, they did something I couldn't do in 6 years. Guess what they did? They went back to their small groups, because we have on-campus groups at our church, and guess what they did? They went into their groups and told the story. And they flipped the church, not me. They began to change the DNA of our church in just a matter of hours, because they experienced Christ in the harvest. I'll end with this. That week, I was inundated with 3 types of text, emails, and phone calls. The first one was the people were at the training. I shared the gospel for the first time with my son-in-law. I shared the gospel with my coworkers. I shared it with my son. I shared it with my neighbor. That's gold. I would come back every time to my email and go, hey, do you got a second? Let me tell you a story. And they were also telling my pastor at the same time too. The other thing, I got a bunch of text and emails from teachers, small group leaders in my church. This is where I'll end. They're like, hey, Ross, that guy that went to the training, he wants to lead the group for the next 3 weeks and share with the class what he learned. Because at the end of the training, we challenge you to have to train somebody else. Hey, is this cool? Is this heresy? Do you know anything about this? I'm like, yeah, I'm the one who told them. What I didn't realize is I was creating a pipeline of new group leaders, had no idea that was coming. And then the last email or text I got was, why wasn't I invited? I said, you were. You just ignored it. For the next few weeks, I got inundated with those 3 categories of emails and text. Guys, God was opening the door of the kingdom, and I just happened to be at the door entrance. Tomorrow, what I will do is I will tell you the rest of the story. That was 8 years ago. That story has led me here. It has multiple streams, multiple plot lines. I've lost track of it. It's just impossible to track what God began to do through that work. But tomorrow, I'll fill in this and I'll tell you what happened, because the best part is what's happened in the last 8 years since that day. Let me pray. Lord, I pray that I told that story accurately and I didn't embellish. Lord, I pray that something was said today will again spur each other toward death, so we can experience you, Lord. Thank you that for whatever reason, and I really have no idea why, that you allowed me to be a part of this story. I pray that it would bring honor to your name and not mine. I hope people will forget about me. And Lord, I love you, and I thank you for giving me breath and waking me up this morning. And I pray for these people here today, and that, and also I pray for our country today. As it is an interesting time. But Lord, the gospel is getting brighter and brighter as this world gets darker and darker. Lord, thank you for this time, and I pray this in your name. Amen.